27, 26, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 1, live.
Respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Milan Pagon, distinguished speaker and panelists, and our valued participants at home and abroad. Very good morning. Myself, Commodore Qazi Imdadul Haq, retired Director General BIMRAT, is going to moderate today's webinar. This is an international trilateral series of webinars arranged by IUB, ICAD, and BIMRAT. Our main theme was increasing political, economic, ecological, economic, and regional importance of the Bay of Bengal for Bangladesh in the post-COVID-19 world. Today is the second webinar trickle down to ecological and environmental importance of the Bay of Bengal. Sir Salimul Haq, who is present here, and we also have two distinguished panelists from India. I will introduce them before their presentation. I will request all our valued listeners to participate, keeping their microphone switch off. Otherwise, there will be background noise.
Internet audio there.
Now I welcome Professor Milan Pagon, Vice Chancellor, IUB, for his opening remarks before the debate of today's webinar. Professor Milan Pagon.
Thank you very much, Commodore Hogg. Dear colleagues, guests, friends, dear viewers, this is the second webinar in the series of 4 that we are organizing in partnership between or among IUB, BIMRAT, and ICAD. Now, I emphasized in my opening remarks during the first webinar that this situation of coronavirus clearly showed us that the only way out of the situation and the only way to any kind of improvement is through collaboration and evidence-based decision making. This second webinar today is again a very good example of collaboration and partnership. As Commodore Hogg already mentioned, we have a joint effort here. BIMRAT is contributing the moderator, Commodore Hogg. The keynote speaker is Professor Salimul Haq, the director of ICAD. And of course, we have our ambassador retired, Tariq Karim, who is a senior fellow here at IUB. And we have, of course, our colleagues with us. So this is a very good example of how we should join forces and collaborate in these areas. Now, today's topic is ecology and environment. As we all know, ecology is about living organisms interacting with each other and their environment. And let's be very, very honest. We humans did an extremely poor job in this regard. We've been destroying everything around us. There are species that are extinct due to our activities, due to what we've been doing. So it is really high time that we reconsider what we're doing and we start changing our ways. Now, we talked about the ocean last time. We talked about Bay of Bengal. We talked about the untapped resources. We talked about how many species are living in the ocean. And it is so important, and it was pointed out the other day, that when we try to harvest these untapped potentials, that we do not destroy the environment, that we do not disrupt the equilibrium in this ecological ecosystem. So these are topics that are extremely important for Bay of Bengal, and I'm really looking forward to today's presentations. In addition to the three partners that I mentioned, we today have two guests coming from India. They will be introduced in due course, and let's hear from all of us, and hopefully we'll reach to some useful conclusions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Milan Pagon, for your introductory and welcoming speech. To facilitate us to take your photo for our advertisement or for future need. Just open your webcam so that we can take a photo. Keep your microphone off, please. So meanwhile, I request Ambassador Tariq Karim to recap the proceedings of Inception webinar held on 15 September. Thank you, Ambassador Tariq Karim.
Thank you very much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I don't know, somehow it appears that
can you hear me?
Has gone freeze.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chairman. A brief recapitulation.
Can any? Oh, sorry,
I'm afraid our moderator froze.
Microphone. Okay, I can hear you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Ambassador Tariq Karim, sir, are you okay?
Yes, I'm okay. If you can hear me, I'll carry on.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The first webinar in this series was held on September 15. The International Affairs Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister was the chief guest. Foreign Secretary Mr. Masood bin Bowman delivered the keynote address on likely geopolitical, geostrategic, and geoeconomic scenario in the Bay of Bengal region in the post-COVID world, implications and Bangladesh's response to challenges. Apart from two discussants, Professor Imtiaz Hussain, head of the Global Studies Department and Dean of School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, and Professor Mustafizur Rahman, Distinguished Fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue, we had two special guests who spoke at the webinar. Ambassador Shahidul Islam, Secretary General of the BIMSTEC Secretariat, and His Excellency Mr. Ito Naoki, Ambassador of Japan to Bangladesh. Mr. Mateen Chaudhary, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the IUB, inaugurated the series of seminars, which was the first collaborative venture of IUB, BIMRAD, and ICAT. The Vice Chancellor IUB, Professor Milan Pagon, Chairman BIMRAD Admiral Nizam, and Director ICAT, Dr. Salimul Haq also spoke. Chief guest Professor Gauhar Rizvi lauded the announcement of the collaborative partnership that IUB, BIMRAD, and ICAT had just entered into on the previous day. He pointed out that institutions do not make people, people make institutions. He said that sadly for long there had existed a huge gap and distance between policymakers and research institutions. He hoped that this new institutional partnership would not only bridge that gap, but also delve into deep research on various aspects of the Bay of Bengal as it affected the lives of the denizens of the Bay region, and enable policymakers to arrive at informed decisions for benefit of all. Foreign Secretary Momen, in his inspiring address, spelled out the various elements, geopolitical, geostrategic, and geoeconomic, that makes the Bay of Bengal an important commons, requiring more detailed research and much greater attention than it has received so far, to enable policymakers to formulate informed policies of governance of this commons and harvesting its resources in a sustainable manner. He listed 5 priorities for Bangladesh in respect of the Bay: funding, technology, management skills, market access and brand equity, and capability to build on existing platforms in defense, agriculture, industry, communication, water resources, etc. He also exhorted that there were 7 themes, 7 Fs as he called them, related to the Bay of Bengal that required deep actionable research. Fleet, that's alongside creating an information and security network staged by all major powers, could we create a fleet of deep sea shipping and fishing vessels and develop coastal areas for setting up processing plants? Fabrication, could we explore the possibility of attracting major economic players of the world? Freeway, could we explore the possibility of centrally taking over all major riverbank systems and creating environment-friendly industrial ecosystem, preserving the navigability, shore protection, and ecological sustenance for the rivers, and also for connecting the seas? What if we involve our neighbors in the project? 4, fireflies. The 4th area where significant focus could be given is to have smart power corridors across the Bay of Bengal, connecting the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna Basin, and the Mekong Delta. 5th, finance. The creation of a blockchain-enabled platform economy ecosystem. 6th, fusion. Could we think of connecting P2P potentials of the Bay of Bengal and promote it as a safe space for civilizational dialogues, as opposed to a place for confrontation? And lastly, but not least, the future. We need to consider the skills needed for survival and growth in the next decade and beyond. Professor Mustafizur Rahman in his remarks made the following seminal points: that we should build back better for an environmental sustainable future. We should distinguish between regionalism and regionalization. He emphasized the importance of deepening trade connectivity, investment connectivity, transport connectivity, logistics connectivity, people-to-people connectivity, and the financial connectivity. He said that conceptually, Bangladesh should think in terms of its territory to be 262,000 square kilometers, including its maritime exclusive zone, in its participation in global negotiations to ensure that they do not impede our exploration and exploitation of the resources in the Bay of Bengal. But he also suggested that the entire region must now think beyond BIMSTEC. As a result of COVID, there was a distributing trend in rise of protectionism, he said. A global consensus was urgently required, but we must begin with a synthesis of local interest with regional interest that would eventually expand to the global context. In this process, we need to extend bilateral arrangements to become trilateral, and also for expanding the web of interdependence for deepening regional cooperation. We should focus more on arriving at inclusive, comprehensive agreements. Professor Imtiaz Hussain in his remarks explained that the post-pandemic policymaking scenarios has spinned off multiple dimensions. The situation has created a virtuous circle between direct economic effects that included trade shrinkages accompanied by investment, remittance, and industrial collapse, secular effects that have security and ecological consequences that must spur industrial rethinking, and indirect economic effects that included construction collapse, bailout funds diverted from production, and regional agreements losing impetus. Social policies therefore needed to be thought out that would be directed towards social and behavioral change. There was an urgent need for viewing things holistically and abjuring this silo approach to problem solving. Ambassador Ito Naoki of Japan, in his remarks, said that the center of gravity of the world economy is shifting towards Asia, and in fact, in the direction of the Bay of Bengal, and that geopolitical transformation of the world has impacted this region in recent years, in particular the wake of the corona pandemic. Pointing to the development of regional economy through enhanced connectivity and the web of industrial hub activities, through the notable examples in the construction of deep sea port, power plants, and industrial facilities in Matarbari, all of which Japan is also involved. He asserted that all these would be a game changer for Bangladesh economy in the next decade and also give it a strategic reach with geopolitical advantage. He suggested that the Indo-Pacific strategy with its governance framework based on rule of law, free trade regime, principles of freedom of navigation and rule-based maritime and international order could further promote Bangladesh's ambitious goals. He pointed out that the Bay of Bengal proved itself a notable and laudable exception to other regions by the settlement of all maritime boundaries dispute through the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and was a laudable illustration of Bangladesh's commitment to rule of law and rule-based maritime order. Ambassador Ito also stated that for ensuring regional peace and stability that led to attainment of human security beyond borders and poverty-free socio-economic development across the Bay of Bengal region, addressing meaningfully sustained development of all peoples in the region was important. And it was also necessary to address issues related to disaster prevention, climate actions, and humanitarian assistance. BIMSTEC Secretary General recapitulated the recent progresses made by the member countries, who were all Bay of Bengal countries. He emphasized the increasing importance of the Bay of Bengal that held possibilities of marine cooperation having various dimensions, and hoped that regional cooperation would expand further in the Bay of Bengal region. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ambassador Tariq Karim, sir, we can't hear you. You have gone mute.
I finished. I thank you for giving me the time.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Ambassador Tariq Karim. Thanks very much for your elaborate briefing on the Inception webinar. That was a good point we can take away. Now our main part of today's webinar, our first keynote speaker will be Dr. Salimul Haq. Professor Salimul Haq needs, in fact, no introduction, especially in the field of environment and climate change issue. However, a few words I must mention in his recognition for the new participants in today's seminar. He is the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, ICAD, at IUB since 2009, and senior fellow at the International Institute for Environment and Development in London. He is also senior advisor on locally led action, Global Center on Adaptation, and advisor of climate change program at BRAC. He has published numbers of articles and is a popular journalist in the Daily Star. He has been named among the world's 100 most influential people in climate policy for 2019 by a London-based public servants networking group. With this brief introduction, now I welcome Dr. Salimul Haq. The floor is yours. Time is 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Commodore Imdadul Haq. Let me take this opportunity for also expressing on behalf of my center, the International Center for Climate Change and Development, our pleasure and our looking forward to this tripartite collaboration between IUB, ICAD, and BIMRAD going forward. And I thank you for inviting me to give the keynote in this second webinar. I want to start, though, with two apologies. The first apology is that I have some liberty with the topic that was assigned to me. I am not myself a marine biologist or ecologist. I work on climate change. So I'm going to talk about climate change in the context of the Bay of Bengal and talk a little bit about the science and the politics of that. And I hope that that will be interesting for the listeners. And again, apologies to our two discussants. I'm sure they will be able to speak more, Dr. Barua and Dr. Anurag, on the marine biology and ecological aspects, which I will not be delving into. The second apology is that I have a PowerPoint slide with a lot of slides and a lot of dense information. In the interest of time, I will not go through everything, but I will make it available to everybody if they want to look at it later on in a little bit more detail. So I will do a very a rapid sort of rush through the headlines of the various slides that I will be presenting. And so let me start with the outline of my presentation. As I said, I have chosen to focus on climate change as it affects our region and the Bay of Bengal in particular. And I'll start with a little bit of global climate change because this is a global problem, a global issue, both on the science side as well as the political side. And then I'll come to our region, the South Asia region, particularly focusing on Bangladesh and the Bay of Bengal. And I'll end with a few ideas for what we might be able to do looking forward, both within the region, within the country, and within our tripartite collaboration going forward. So let me start with, and one of the things that the climate change issue requires is it requires a little bit of understanding of the science of climate change. It's a science-based issue. I think everybody now needs to have some understanding of what that is. And the science comes from a very robust scientific process called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a UN body with governments, all the governments of the world participating. And what they do is they produce periodic reports produced by scientists. So what they do is they bring together scientists from all over the world, and every few years they produce a big a big report, assessment report on the status of the science. And I've had the privilege of being a lead author in the last 3 assessment reports. And you can see some of the covers of the assessment reports here, and also the fact that the IPCC won the Nobel Prize in 2007 for the work that they have done. So this is a very, very robust scientific process. Once the IPCC comes out with a report, that is almost unquestionable in terms of the science. And that is extremely important for us to keep in mind. Next. The other arena that we need to be also cognizant of is the political arena at the global level. And we have a global treaty called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to which all countries belong, including the United States of America. So incidentally, the President Trump has not withdrawn the US from the Framework Convention. He has only indicated that the US will withdraw from the Paris Agreement, which is the slide that I have put up here, which is the latest and the biggest important agreement that we achieved at the 21st annual Conference of Parties. We have an annual Conference of Parties of all the countries, and they come up with reviews and decisions. And a few years ago in 2015 in Paris, we came up with a new agreement, which brought up the Framework Convention to take more robust actions. And the biggest agreement from our perspective was that we have a global temperature goal of 1.5 degrees centigrade that we want to keep below. At the moment, we are not headed for it. We are well above it, but we want to keep on efforts to keep ambition going to reduce emissions to reach that goal. Next. A little bit about what causes climate change. This is impacts the emissions of greenhouse gases modeled into the future, past and future. And what happens with the greenhouse gases, which are carbon dioxide that comes from burning fossil fuels like coal, petroleum, and natural gas, as well as other gases like methane, is that they go into the atmosphere, they absorb the sun's rays, and they raise the temperature. Already global temperature, global atmospheric temperature has gone up by more than 1 degree. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is quite significant because of human-induced climate change. And it's likely to continue to go up. And as I said, we don't want it to go up more than 1.5, but we are headed for going above 2 degrees. So we need to take some drastic action to reduce emissions. So the big emphasis on reducing emissions to prevent impacts of climate change. However, what we are more interested in, and what is more relevant for us in this region, including Bangladesh and the countries around the Bay of Bengal, is what is going to happen because of this increased temperature and global warming. It has a number of impacts. First of all, increased temperature in and of itself is a problem. We will get more heat waves. We will get more hot weather. We are seeing this around the world right now, as you may know, in California and the west coast of the United States. They are suffering from major wildfires of a scale that they have not seen before. and more than 500,000 people have had to be evacuated in those states because of the wildfires. And that is now attributable to the increased temperature because of human-induced climate change. Similarly, there will be impacts on precipitation and rainfall patterns. The precipitation impact is a bit more complex. We're not exactly sure what it will do in the South Asia monsoon region. The predictions from the scientific modelers is that the rainfall pattern will become more unpredictable. Not that it will become, we'll have more rain or less rain, but that the pattern of the rainfall will change so that whatever we used to get, the monsoons will become heavier, more rain, and the dry periods will become drier. So even though the total rain over a year may not be more or less than before, its change in pattern may cause more floods and more droughts at the same time, something we need to be worried about and think about. Next. From a sea level rise perspective and a maritime perspective, one of the biggest impacts that we need to worry about is sea level rise, which is a combination of thermal expansion of the oceans because of this increased temperature, but also, and more importantly, because of ice that is melting from glaciers, from mountains, from the Greenland ice cap, Antarctic ice cap, that are now raising the sea level considerably. We've already seen a little bit of sea level rise, and we are anticipating quite a lot more. The actual impacts of sea level rise is very dependent on the location. If a coastal zone is low-lying like ours, then it's much more impacted or much more vulnerable than a coastal zone that has high cliffs or rocky formations. Ours is alluvial, very low-lying, and the impact of sea level rise in low-lying coastal areas and islands will be much more severe than in other areas. Next. So sea level rise, as I said, is one of the key impacts that is a very, very strong impact that will happen all over the world, wherever in coastal zones. And low-lying coastal zones in particular, mainly the deltas, major deltas of the world, the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta in our region, the Mekong Delta in Southeast Asia, the various deltas in China, the Nile, etc. So all the major deltas around the world are going to be affected by the impacts of sea level rise, and they are already being affected by the impacts of sea level rise, particularly salinity intrusion, which is one of the early impacts of increased sea level rise around the world. Next. This is also one of the IPCC reports that shows the various kinds of impacts and the severity of those impacts. The color code is that red is very bad impact, yellow is a moderately bad impact, and white is less impact. And you'll see the different ecosystems that are shown there. So we have warm water corals on the left-hand side, which is one of the most impacted. And this would include the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. There are some warm water corals in Bay of Bengal as well, which will be extremely affected. And then there are a number of fisheries, mangroves, and various other coastal flooding, various other impacts that are relevant for the Bay of Bengal area that we need to be cognizant of, and we need to be studying in more detail so that we know what's going to happen. Next. So in terms of disasters, there are some very important ones that we need to be aware of. That not that we don't know them, we know that the disasters happen, but what we need to be aware of is that the impacts of climate change are going to make them worse. And I'll pick two. One is floods and the other one are cyclones. Cyclones in the Bay of Bengal are likely the number of cyclones anywhere. Cyclones, we call them cyclones in our region. In the Pacific, they call them typhoons. In the Atlantic, they call them hurricanes. They are the same phenomenon. The numbers are not predicted to increase because of climate change. So they are natural phenomena. They happen every year. We will have them as before. What will happen, though, because of human-induced climate change, is because we are elevating atmospheric temperature, we are also elevating the sea surface temperature, and that is a factor in making a cyclone, any given cyclone, into a more intense cyclone. And the intensity of the cyclone is what causes the damage. A low-intensity cyclone causes little damage. A high-intensity cyclone causes a great deal more damage. And in our region in the Bay of Bengal, we recently saw a cyclone Amphan, which became a super cyclone while it was in the Bay of Bengal because of elevated temperatures. And we have a slide on that coming up. So let me now focus a little bit on our region, as I mentioned, that what are the aspects of climate change that we need to worry about. Let me start from the terrestrial side, and I will postulate that we can imagine the region as an hourglass, where you have a upper part and a lower part and a constricted bit in between, where sand flows from the top half through the constriction to the bottom half, and that's how you measure time through an hourglass. You can think of this region as being a similar kind of hourglass, with the northern part being the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna delta region, which is shown in this slide, where what is flowing is not sand, but water, particularly fresh water, flowing from the Himalayas, the major rivers of this region, and they are flowing largely through Bangladesh, also a little bit through West Bengal. So Bangladesh and West Bengal are the funnel through which this water flows into the Bay of Bengal. And then we have at the bottom half of that hourglass, we have the Bay of Bengal, which is a marine water environment and ecosystem, where the fresh water from the upper half is flowing into. And it goes into the Bay of Bengal through a variety of flows. There's a freshwater flow that goes into the Bay of Bengal for quite some distance, and then finally mingles in the marine ecosystem of the Bay of Bengal itself. So the country Bangladesh is very much at the bottleneck of this hourglass, with the water flowing from the north through Bangladesh, the delta, to the south into the Bay of Bengal. And the Bay of Bengal is the lower half of this hourglass. And the Bay of Bengal, in this slide, you'll see a number of impacts that are predicted because of human-induced climate change. The primary one, as I said, is higher temperatures leading to a potential increase in intensity, not number, but intensity of cyclones that we will get in the future. Next slide. This is a little bit of the global situation on where the big disasters are happening, and you'll see that our region, South Asia, is very, very prominent here. The dark reds are the most vulnerable zones, and you'll see that all of us in South Asia, including both the Bay of Bengal side and the Arabian Sea side, we would collectively be amongst the most vulnerable in the whole world. I think the comparable vulnerability are small islands in the Pacific who don't show up on a map of this scale. They are extremely vulnerable as countries. But in terms of population and land, then South Asia, our region, particularly around the Bay of Bengal, is one of the most vulnerable hotspots globally, which is something that we need to keep in mind. And later on, I'll speak a little bit about how we might even take that as an opportunity to be proactive in this region. Next slide. This is the slide I mentioned earlier of the Amphan super cyclone as it was being created in the Bay of Bengal. And the scientists have studied it already, and they have shown that the sea surface temperature was at least 1 degree warmer than normal. And that was what fed into the intensity of the cyclone, which became a super cyclone. Fortunately for Bangladesh, it hit West Bengal first. The people of Kolkata bore the brunt of it, and then it turned and came to Bangladesh through the Sundarban forest. So the Sundarban again bore the brunt in the Bangladesh side, and then the people of Bangladesh were not that badly affected, although we did have a few deaths, and mainly because Bangladesh has a very, very good and a very sophisticated early warning system. More than 2 million people got the warnings, moved to shelters, and were out of harm's way. Although quite a lot of high tides and salinity, saline water, did overtop embankments and affect crops in the coastal area. So the coastal zone in Bangladesh is still affected by that and by previous cyclones as well. Next slide. And so this is just a little bit about the low-lying coastal area of Bangladesh, which is a cyclone-prone area and the sea level rise prone area. As I mentioned earlier, being the low-lying delta of these major rivers, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Meghna. This is an extremely vulnerable, susceptible area. Also, a lot of poor people living in these vulnerable areas. The slide on the left side shows the poverty map overlaid with the sea level rise map and salinity map, showing that large numbers of very poor people will be affected, and it will lead to potential migration due to climate change. We are already seeing a lot of rural to urban migration taking place. This will get even more exacerbated by the impacts of climate change, particularly sea level rise in the low-lying coastal areas of the country, not just Bangladesh. In fact, all the countries around the Bay of Bengal. Next slide. Next. This is another slide showing salinity trends, because as I said, the first impact we see is saline water intrusion into our low-lying areas. A lot of the crop areas where we used to grow rice, we can no longer grow rice. We have adapted to some extent to grow crab and fish and shrimp, but there is a limit to how much adaptation is possible. Eventually, livelihoods will be lost and people will have to move, and we will see climate migrants in the millions, unfortunately, taking place in this region, which we will have to prepare ourselves for and be ready for in the future to avoid it becoming a crisis. Next slide. Let me move a little bit now to the other major hazard that we have, which is extreme rainfall. Right now in Bangladesh, as you know, we are suffering the tail end of a major flood that took place over the last few weeks. The water is now slowly flowing out of the country, but as it flows, you'll see the riverine parts of Bangladesh are extremely flood prone, the blue zones. And then in the coastal areas, we have sea level rise and coastal inundation as well. In the cities like Dhaka and Chittagong, we also have a different kind of flood. Every time we have a very heavy downpour, the water cannot flow out, it doesn't drain out. We have very strong, difficult conditions for all our citizens to commute back and forth across the city. Transport is affected, and similarly, other kinds of floods like flash floods that take place in the Sylhet region from the Meghna basin floods that take from heavy rainfall in the India side also is a major problem. Let's move on. I won't go into much of the flooding. Let me move on in the interest of time to the future opportunities that I mentioned earlier. So I'll move from the global to the regional and the national. At the global level, I mentioned the UN Framework Convention, but in addition to that, there has been a recent initiative called the Global Commission on Adaptation, set up a couple of years ago under the leadership of Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General, together with Bill Gates and Kristalina Georgieva and a number of other luminary commissioners. The last 2 years, they have come up with a major report on adaptation, on how adaptation needs to be given much more importance, much more focus. And one of the things that will happen is that they are holding a summit, a global summit on adaptation on the 25th of January, which was originally supposed to be in October in the Netherlands, but because of COVID has been postponed to the 25th of January, and is no longer one event in one place, but a series of events around the world. One of those series of events will be here in Dhaka, hosted by the government of Bangladesh. The Prime Minister will be organizing and speaking at that event, and that will be focusing on locally led adaptation. And in the lower right-hand side of the picture, you can see just earlier this month, the launch of a regional, South Asia Regional Center as part of this global initiative for South Asia in Dhaka that was jointly launched by the Prime Minister and Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And that will be a South Asia Regional Center where we will have an opportunity to collaborate with them. And I've already informed them of our collaboration with BIMRAD and IUB, and hopefully once they start their work, we will be able to have a dialogue with them on how we might be able to collaborate going forward. Next slide. Just very quickly on what's happening in Bangladesh, I won't go into this infographic, it's quite detailed, but to just say that in the context of Bangladesh, we have the 8th five-year plan coming up right now. We have In addition to that, a perspective plan to 2041, and we even have a much longer term Delta plan that takes us to 2100. And in the very short term, over the next year, the government of Bangladesh, together with a number of stakeholders, are going to be developing the National Adaptation Plan, which all countries are supposed to do under the Framework Convention. Bangladesh has just started the National Adaptation Plan. And again, another opportunity for our tripartite initiative, BIMRAD, IUB, and ICAD, to engage with them. Again, they have just started their work. I have informed them of our interest to engage with them, and I hope that we will be able to do that going forward. Next slide, please. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I'm going to just highlight a couple of more things. Firstly, the fact that Bangladesh has just taken over the chairmanship of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which is a major group of nearly 50 climate vulnerable countries. The leadership goes from for 2-year periods from one head of government to another. Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has just taken over. She will be the leader for the next 2 years. And during this presidency, they have come up with a game plan of doing a number of very, very interesting things. One of them is a focus on blue economy, which I hope we can then also engage with them. Under the Climate Vulnerable Forum, there is also another forum of the finance ministers. That forum calls itself the V20, although it's not 20 countries, it's about 50 countries. Nevertheless, the finance ministers group is called V20, and they also have a number of activities, and Bangladesh finance minister has taken over the chair of that group as well. So over the next 2 years, an opportunity for us to engage with both the V20 and the CVF going forward. Next. I won't go through this list of events that are coming up in the next couple of years. As I mentioned, over the course of our chairmanship, Bangladesh's chairmanship of the CVF, and many of the countries in the Bay of Bengal are members of the CVF. So again, this is a subset. Bay of Bengal countries are a subset of the Climate Vulnerable Forum countries, an opportunity for us to use the Climate Vulnerable Forum to focus on the countries within the region for us to collaborate with going forward. Next slide, please. So I'll end now by mentioning an opportunity that we organize at IUB and ICAD for the last 6 years. It's an annual event called Gobeshona. Gobeshona is a Bangla word for research, and it, in this context, is a platform where more than 50 universities and research institutions, mainly in Bangladesh, but also outside Bangladesh, have come together over the last 6 years. We have a lot of common areas of work, and every year in January, we hold a big annual conference. Usually, in the last 6 years, it's been a big physical conference. Several hundred people from around the world come physically in IUB. The pictures you see are our university. This year, we'll be doing it as a virtual conference from the 21st to the 24th of January, exactly 4 days, the 4 days preceding the Global Summit. So we will have a Gobeshona series of sessions during the Gobeshona conference, 7th annual conference. And I've already indicated to the organizers that we will have a session on climate change and the Bay of Bengal, where our 3 institutions, ICAD, IUB, and BIMRAD, can be the host of that session. And then we bring in other relevant actors who may participate in that session. So an opportunity coming up in January that we can jointly work towards. And I think that's the end of my presentation. I'll end with these key dates that I mentioned. The 20th to 24th of January is the Gobeshona 7 conference. The Climate Adaptation Summit is on the 25th. It's a one-day event with one of the events being here in Dhaka. And then later in the year, we have the 26th conference of the UN Framework Convention. It's called the Conference of Parties, COP26, which will take place in the UK, in Glasgow, Scotland. Again, an opportunity where the global leaders will come together to discuss what to do next on climate change. I think that's the end. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this presentation. Again, apologies for making it more climate change than ecology, but I feel that this climate change issue, being a major global issue for the whole world, particularly for this region, has a very important element to play. And opportunities for us to take up if we are able to in the Bay of Bengal region as well. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salimul Haq. As I told dear participants, he is an expert man, especially in the climate change sector. So he has it's a quite well expounded lecture, repleted with lots of citations and slides. We are very, very benefited, definitely. I don't want to recap everything, but one is the rise of sea level is a very, very concerning for Bangladesh. Because of the sea level rise, the cyclones definitely happening, and at the same time, the climate migration in our coastal area. That's also very, very one of the warning Dr. Salimul Haq has given through his lecture. So, okay, meanwhile, a few points for the participants and also for the organizer. I will request the organizer to disable the chat box because I saw the chat box is disabled. Because after we have two panelists, and then after two panelists, we have question and answer session. So please, I'll request you to start. You can start sending your question. Very, very sharp and crisp. Please don't go for details, anything. I will pick up, even if you can send the those who are participating through Facebook, you can also send your question. I will pick up question from Facebook as well. So I'll request admin to disable the chat box. Chat disabled. Please enable the chat box. Thank you very much. And now we have two panelists. Both of them are from India. The first panelist is the Dr. Anamika Borua. I think I can see her here. Dr. Anamika Borua is a professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Science, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, India. Her research interest is how political, social, and economical factors shape environmental decisions and change. For the last 10 years, she has been involved in academic and consultancy projects related to water issues in South Asia. She has published several articles in international journals. With this short introduction, Dr. Anamika Borua, you have 10 minutes on the topics ecological and environmental relevance for Bangladesh. Dr. Anamika Borua, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So good morning to everyone, and I'm joining from India, from Assam, actually. And thank you very much, Professor Haq, for your very interesting presentation and setting the scene for the discussion today. My presentation will touch upon climate change, but I am not focusing entirely on climate change. I will be focusing on water more, as I work on water resource. And Brahmaputra is a research focus area for, so far it has been my research area. Before I start, I would like to first thank Ambassador Tariq Karim for having me here. Very important topic indeed, and particularly now when we have an opportunity, if I may say so, amidst this crisis, to relook at the situation we are in and to move towards Build Back Better. Before I go into the presentation or the discussion, I don't have a slide, but I'll just discuss the topic that's been given to me. Personally, I feel that COVID-19 has been a big challenge, particularly for South Asia, for the countries in South Asia, because of several impacts that we see today, not only on lives, but also in the livelihood. And definitely it has not been easy for us, for our governments to make a choice between lives and livelihood. There is a trade-off in both. If you choose life, you are putting a lot of people's livelihood at risk. And if we are focusing on livelihood, then the life is at risk. And hence, I have been telling my friends and colleagues that unfortunately, we are in a situation that we have to have both moving together, both life and livelihood. We can't say that let the economy wait and let's only talk about the life. So yes, definitely a very, very difficult situation. And here I think cooperation, of course, has never been less important, but now it has definitely become a very, very important point. Again, keeping in mind that probably another opportunity for us to do what we haven't been doing for so many years, focusing particularly in South Asia, the countries which are around the Bay of Bengal. Now, there are several areas of cooperation which have been always been discussed and also identified in several forums, and I'm sure many of you are a part of those forums as well, be it BIMSTEC, SAARC, BCIM, and some of these identified areas have been trade and investment, transport and communication, energy, tourism, fisheries, agriculture, cultural cooperation also, and also public health, which I feel is extremely important at this present context to fight back this pandemic. And as Professor Haq very rightly spoke about climate change, I always feel that climate change is also a kind of an opportunity for us, for the countries to work together to fight back the concerns and the issues that the climate change raises, and provides another channel of cooperation. But one of the most important ecological resource that I see in the context of South Asia, and particularly for India and Bangladesh, is water. I think water is one such resource in this region which has immense capacity to reduce poverty as well as to bring regional development. The way water connects us, it also has become a cause of contestation. And it is now probably important for us to think that how this enormous resource that the region has can be beneficial in saving both life and livelihoods of our people, particularly in the context of climate change, as well as in the context of COVID. I would like to also focus here mainly on the Brahmaputra River Basin so that we can have more focused discussion, an important river that flows into Bangladesh and 4 important and developing countries with diverse national interests, shares this river basin, India, Bangladesh, China, and Bhutan. More than 100 million people live in this Brahmaputra Basin. Most of them are farmers. The economic structure of our region is such that it is highly water dependent, with a vast majority of people depending for their livelihoods, not only on agriculture, but also on livestock, forestry, fisheries, and also industries which has a connect to water, be it textile, handloom, which are all located in the riverbank. And hence there is a huge economic, ecological, environmental, and I would also like to bring in political importance of this river system. But in spite of being an important river system of South Asia with an immense potential for regional development, we really see that very little progress has been made so far at the regional level to manage this transboundary river. To date, there is no international treaty that exists in the management of particularly Brahmaputra River, involving all the 4 basin countries. Of course, there are some bilateral agreements, memorandum civilized world. At the moment, probably the situation that South Asia in general and India and Bangladesh are, with the loss of livelihood and loss of GDP growth, how can we really boost our economy? And at the same time, how can countries cooperate to fight back this particular situation we are in? Now, one of the productive approach, which a lot of literature and also in several river basins that has been talking about, is to examine the benefits the river can provide with a regional approach. And it requires, first of all, riparian to stop viewing water as a commodity to be divided in a zero-sum way, to a renewed understanding of water as a resource by jointly creating benefits in a positive sum approach. Now, for those in case if you are not familiar to this concept of zero sum and positive sum, it's a part of a game theory approach where we say a person's gain is equivalent to another's loss, then it is basically benefit is zero. Whereas if you have a positive sum, that means that both the parties who are together is making a gain out of this discussion or negotiation. Most of the time, what we see is that the treaties or agreements ends up into some kind of a zero-sum game. What I would also like to emphasize here is that, when Professor Haq spoke about climate change and disaster, I think Brahmaputra is a classic example of floods, for example. And so we in fact call this river, unfortunately, as a river of sorrow. So the point is, how can we convert this river of sorrow, which has so much of opportunity, into an actually a river of opportunity? And one way to do it is is through a concept called benefit sharing. And this process of benefit sharing actually shifts the focus of sharing the physical volume of water to the benefits derived from the water resource. The definition itself is based on particularly 3 assumptions. That first, water has a finite and multiple requirements, ranging from drinking to spiritual to ecological requirements. Second, every society is dependent on water output, such as electricity. Third, water-related investments can be maximized when the river basin is accorded the river infrastructure that we want to have is put in a right place, because placing the water infrastructure in the right place, preferred hydrological location, will actually reduce the ecological impacts of these river water infrastructure as well. Now, considering this multiple roles that the river provides, so usually when we talk about benefit sharing, the thing that comes to our mind is usually economic benefit from the river. And this is where I think we need to overcome that. And it basically is not just the economic benefit, but there are like 4 different kinds of benefit the river can provide. One is from an ecological and environmental point of view, where you ensure that the marine life, as well as where you ensure that the river flow is there. So it is basically benefit to the river. So cooperation should be such that you are able to maintain the river in the right form. There is then direct benefit, which is the benefit basically from the river, and it's mostly economic in nature. Then you also have something called political benefit, which means that improved international relations and peace through dialogues and discussion. And the fourth one, which is a larger, which basically takes to it goes out of water, but you also start looking at the regional development using water as a resource. So you're talking about developing trade, tourism, managing disaster, etc. So there are like these 4 different types of benefits a river provides. But most of our negotiations are such that we only focus on the economic benefit the river could provide. And therefore, a lot of contestation happens, a lot of diverse opinion and diverse interests comes in. But for all of these to happen, and what is most important, that is that we need to talk to each other. The countries need to have a platform where they can discuss, talk, share knowledge. We are talking about informed decision making. All of this can only happen when this knowledge sharing itself is happening. One country, usually what happens is countries forget that basin's hydrological interdependency makes the 4 riparian countries vulnerable to each other's use, the way the one use the river. And this vulnerability is more due to ecological sovereignty to me than the political sovereignty, because the countries feel that there is a permanent sovereignty they have over the natural resource, including if it is within the administrative boundary of a country. And hence there is very little effort made by particularly upstream countries to give up this ecological sovereignty. And that is why it becomes very difficult to induce this upstream country particularly to cooperate with the downstream country and to make them bargain with the sovereignty. And the sovereignty bargain can only happen when there are good enough incentives for both the upstream and downstream country to come together. And that is where I feel it is so important for academicians like us to come together. We have been also working extensively to explain and to come up is that transboundary cooperation needs to now move out from only track 1 and formal diplomacy to other or to multi-level, multi-track. Why is that important? It is important because cooperation is not always about formal agreements like treaties, agreements, joint mechanism, joint bodies, which requires a lot of effort, which definitely requires political will, which is important, but it cannot happen overnight. It may take a number of years for these things to happen. We can definitely come together and sign a treaty tomorrow, but that treaty has no importance if tomorrow when you go back, you have been asked too many questions. So to me personally, I feel for Brahmaputra, in fact, we should get a little bit more time, develop a right kind of a treaty, what we really want between the 4 countries. But that can only happen if you start having dialogues before negotiating for a treaty. And these dialogues can become extremely important because it also builds capacity of countries. Upstream countries and downstream countries sit together. The other day we had a webinar and somebody mentioned small sovereignty and large sovereignty. Big countries feel we have a larger sovereignty and the small countries feel they feel that the smaller country have a smaller sovereignty. But there is no such thing. Sovereignty is sovereignty, and everybody would like to have control and autonomy over the resource that they have. And so I feel very strongly that this is a very strong opportunity for several countries, for particularly South Asian countries, researchers to come together jointly and come and do a lot of research. We did a study recently, and we found that if you really do a complete literature research, and you see that very little effort has been really made to understand Brahmaputra Basin, even the impact of climate change. You definitely see the climate change studies have been conducted in Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna Basin. But if you just look at Brahmaputra, you do not really get enough studies. When you do not really understand, when you do not really have information about the river basin, river system, it is difficult to actually negotiate for anything about the river system. So this is where I strongly feel that academic institutions, South-South collaboration between academic institutions is very, very important. We do see a lot of South-North collaboration, extremely important because of several reasons, including capacities that North has. But now I would suggest we should go for South-North-South collaboration, where we have institutions from India, Bangladesh, and probably from the US or the UK, working together, jointly producing a lot of academic research, academic output around these river systems. This collaboration that we will see between the South universities and South collaboration itself, to me, is a big kind of a cooperation, because this can actually eventually can take us to a long-term interaction and communication between different stakeholders, and also up to track 1.5 to track 1. Without this, without knowledge, basically, to my feeling, is that it's not enough. Another very important point I would like to add here before I end is that collaboration that we see within academicians should not be confined only to collaboration where you need extensive data, because it is definitely no doubt that there is a lot of data issues at the moment. And so a lot of collaborative effort gets stuck there and we can't move. We had a recent collaboration between Bangladesh, India, and China. We could not really take it up because it was so technical in nature and there was no data sharing happening. Whereas there are several other areas of collaboration. We still do not have much studies done around livelihoods around the Brahmaputra Basin. We do not really know how the economic activities around the Brahmaputra Basin takes place. Irrigation potential, all of these we are still not aware of. And I think these are the areas, even the cultural importance, the policy making, the international relations, everything needs to be researched. Once such kind of research happens, I think our understanding to even deal with this river at the political level will increase. Of course, gender has always been a mixed topic, and I think it is extremely important. When you talk about disaster, let us all agree that the way a man and a woman faces the consequences of the disaster is very different. So it is extremely important to have a gender lens to all of these studies, this research I'm talking about. COVID itself has unfortunately differential impact for men and women. For example, if you look at the transport sector, earlier the issue was, anyway, it was difficult for a woman to go far off if the network is not good. Now it has become even more challenging in the terms of COVID. So hence, again, I feel COVID has given us an additional opportunity to relook at our research, to relook and redefine how we define cooperation. Shall we only stick to formal cooperation, or we need to now widen the definition of cooperation itself and move from only formal track 1 cooperation to track 2, track 3, people-to-people cooperation, academic cooperation, so on and so forth. So I will end by saying that in South Asia, where a large section of people depend on the natural resource, particularly water-centric livelihoods, we definitely need to take ethical and political responsibility for the consequences of any decision we take, which have an impact on the ecology of the region. Hence, we need to move towards greening of sovereignty, not just political and ecological sovereignty, but greening of the sovereignty. And that is only possible through international cooperation if we really want to build back better. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anamika Barua. Thanks for your elaborate and eloquent speech on targeting mainly water issue. And you ended the speech with international cooperation, which is very, very important and pertinent for Bangladesh. As far as water is concerned, it is a, yes, very important. You have highlighted the issues upstream and lower stream, and Bangladesh being a delta and lower stream, we understand it very well, how it is so important. Thank you very much, Dr. Anamika Borua. And without further delay, I will invite now Dr. Anamitra Anurag Dando. Dr. Dando was over 20 years of field experience on conservation, natural resource, management, adaptation to climate change. Since 2015, he has been an active participant in the Transboundary Sundarbans Cooperation Initiative under the South Asia Water Initiative of the World Bank. Dr. Dando was the founder coordinator of Worldwide Fund Sundarbans program. Currently, he is Senior Visiting Fellow with Observer Research Foundation's Energy and Climate Change Program. His latest article is on climate change in the BIMSTEC region, responding to sea level rise. Dr. Dando, Anurag Dando, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes, please.
Greetings from India. I have begin with congratulating the organizers for coming together and hosting this series of webinar. With due respect to Vice Chancellor Professor Pagon, Commodore Haq yourself, very esteemed Professor Salimul Haq, who has been an inspiration to me for the last 15 years. So thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure. And Dr. Barua, it's a pleasure meeting you. We have not met before. And my heartfelt gratitude to Ambassador Tariq Karim for taking the initiative and inviting me here. We've heard Professor Haq talk about the climate change issues. We have heard Professor Barua talk about the Brahmaputra Basin. And as Professor Haq expects me to talk about the Bay of Bengal region, I will do so from a ecological point of view. It is amongst the major global marine ecoregions of the world. And besides the Sundarbans, which contributes very significantly to the productivity of the entire Bay of Bengal, there is a large marine ecoregion program called the Bob LME. It has had its phase 1. It is yet to get funding for phase 2, but it has secured funding to develop the project further. And so Bob LME, which is the Bay of Bengal Large Marine Ecoregion Program, is a cooperative program between the littoral states, but it also includes Maldives, which is actually in the Arabian Sea and goes beyond what the BIMSTEC region as of now is. Nevertheless, it has about 400 million people who are dependent on the resources, marine resources, for food, livelihood, security. This area is also facing threats in terms of exploitation of the fishery resources and significant reduction in fish population has already been reported. And the chances are, because of the reduction in fish numbers, the duration and intensity of fishing in the Bay of Bengal region might significantly increase, having further consequences in terms of bycatch because of more intensified fishing in the region. The Sundarbans, which adjoins or abuts the area, and as Professor Haq very eloquently explained to us, the hourglass model of very large amounts of water, in fact, the second largest hydrological system in the planet, coming through a very small funnel and then opening into the largest bay, in fact, in the world. The very southern part of the landmass in fact, the intertidal region, the Sundarbans, spanning Bangladesh and India, serves as the fish nursery for the entire Bay of Bengal region. And continued warming, as Professor Haq has already mentioned, has the potential to exacerbate the declines that we are already witnessing in fish population. A rise in sea surface temperature in Bay of Bengal may change phytoplankton community structure and increase the prevalence of harmful algal blooms with significant consequences for the nursery ground of the fisheries. And I do see an opportunity here for Bangladesh and for the institute of which Ambassador Tariq Karim is a member at IUB to actually provide leadership. Bob LME, despite having spent a significant amount of money and time and having produced important documents, there are other international and regional, sub-regional bodies and programs operating in the Bay of Bengal. But despite all of this, none have a clear mandate and geographical scope and or the capacity to support a regional initiative. So I see an opportunity here for Bangladesh and the Institute to provide that leadership. And also because geographically, Bangladesh is pretty much at the center of the littorals. And this would essentially effectively help address the issues confronting the coastal communities. This would call for monitoring, and as Professor Barua was speaking and talking about the collaborations, she talked about instances where the collaboration couldn't yield the results in the absence of data, but not all data has to be monitored in situ. Now it is possible to do a lot of monitoring via satellite, and it should be possible to gather the necessary information. In the meanwhile, what has also happened is we've always heard from IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and IUCN Bangladesh is a very active country office with whom I have had several interactions and collaborations. They've now come up with a framework which is called the Red List of Ecosystems. And I think under Bangladesh's leadership, the Bay of Bengal could be taken up for that kind of an assessment for Red List of Ecosystems, which is a very robust framework to assess risks and inform management and policy. Given that the Red List has been adopted within the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, and thus provides important information to track progress, not only in terms of the health of the ecosystem, but also to track progress on sustainable development goals, besides the IT targets of the Convention on Biodiversity. So biodiversity, CBD. Professor Haq talked about the UNFCCC. In fact, where the convention came about in 1992, at the Rio conference, UNFCCC is one of the triplets, the CBD being the other one, and the Combating Desertification Convention is the other one. Anyway, there are threats to the Bay of Bengal area and the Sundarbans that need to be looked into, and climate change is exacerbating it. For example, changes in carbonate chemistry, that is ocean acidification within coastal Bay of Bengal and particularly in the Sundarbans, can strongly influence biological community structure and resulting mangrove ecosystem functioning. Such changes that can now be monitored, as I was saying, using satellite remote sensing and validated using robust in situ measurements. So we may not be as challenged as we were earlier. Going back to a little more detail on the region and within the bay in terms of warming, we are already, as Professor Haq pointed out, more than 0.7 degrees centigrade near surface temperature warming, and we could be anywhere between 2.5 to 4.5 degrees centigrade by the end of this century, which has serious consequences, not only for Bangladesh, but all the littorals. In fact, I have a little, let me look up this information. Bangladesh has 13.5% of its population within the elevation of less than 5 meters. And it is interesting to note that this has been steady. This 13.5% population has been steady from 1990 to decadal data, 1990, 2000, and 2010. But what is happening is the rural-urban proportion is changing. And within this 13.5%, in 1990, the rural population percentage was 11.1%. It now stands at the end of 2010, which is about another decade late, is 10.8%. Whereas on the other hand, the percentage of population, urban percentage of population occupying less than 5 meter elevation area was 2.3%. Now it stands at 2.7%. So, and this is the trend amongst all the other littorals, be it India, Myanmar, Thailand, and Sri Lanka. Thailand and Sri Lanka are actually deviations from this trend. In Sri Lanka, we know because of the tsunami of 2004 and the policy changes that the Sri Lankan government brought about, it has actually seen a decline in its vulnerable area population from 3.3, I'm talking about rural population, it is now down to 2.3. Same thing for its urban population, down from 2.2 to 2%. But for India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, it's the other way around, where our population in absolute numbers is increasing and also in percentage terms. So this is another area where Bangladesh could provide leadership. It already has a world-class early warning system. But what I could suggest and expect, in fact, is looking at insurance, because there are a number of measures that are response measures, and insurance being one of them. And given that 2.7%, 13.5% are fairly large numbers, and these are going to be affected and are already being affected. And as Professor Salimul Haq was already talking about, that paddy agriculture is no longer possible in areas and is undergoing change in terms of crab and fish and shrimp and so on and so forth. These might be economically, give higher returns, but social returns are far, far poorer, because the number of people who can get involved in paddy agriculture as opposed to crab fattening or shrimp farming is far less. It displaces population. So we're going to have, as Professor Haq said, movement of people. And in fact, now we are in a situation because of the pandemic where the response normally from these areas would have been to move out, particularly after Cyclone Amphan struck our area. And we have historically seen people moving to other areas, but because of the pandemic, the mobility has now turned into immobility. And going forward, we are likely to experience more such situations where hazardous events will intersect. In my living memory, this is the first time I am witnessing two major hazardous events intersecting, but this is not the last time that I am likely to witness. And therefore, these two areas to me, leadership in the Bay of Bengal ecosystem monitoring and coming up with insurance products, not only for Bangladesh, but also for all the littorals. And when Professor Haq was showing the map at the global scale, the smaller islands were not showing up, simply because the scale was such, but it is going to be very significant for even these smaller states. Climate change changes everything for everybody. Nobody is immune. It's just that some countries have more space and resources, and therefore they will have a little more time. For us, we will have less time because of limited space, larger population, and so on and so forth. So because I have worked so much in the Sundarbans, it would not be right concluding without saying a few words on Sundarbans. What I think, and again, Bangladesh, and having participated in the transboundary cooperation initiatives between Bangladesh and India, I have seen Bangladesh coming forward much more freely than India does in terms of cooperation. But I think Bangladesh needs to maintain that initiative. Because see, for India, Sundarbans, Bay of Bengal is just one part. The larger part is the rest of India. And because of our strained relationship with our Western neighbor, the focus somehow goes to the West, despite the fact we know that here we could achieve far more if we collaborate and cooperate. And therefore, we should not let that opportunity pass, and Sundarbans provides us that opportunity. So connectivity between the two portions is fundamentally important for the overall health and condition of not only the Sundarbans area, but also for the Bay of Bengal area. And the key drivers of diversity, if we keep in mind, and productivity are obviously temperature and salinity, freshwater flow. Professor Barua talked about the situation with freshwater flow, and I am well aware of the concerns in Bangladesh so far as freshwater flows are concerned. And I sincerely hope that if we are at it, we can make things better, because now we are also seeing the consequences of damming our rivers, irrespective of where we are damming them. And therefore, not only it interferes with the fluvial sediment delivery to the coastal zone, it also changes the fluvial nitrogen loads into the coastal zone, and going into the future, the implications for coastal and marine ecosystem productivity are likely to be severe. I think I have run out of time. I will stop here, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anurag. With the speech of Dr. Anurag, we have come to the end. Dr. Salimul Haq with the keynote speech, and followed by two panelist speaks. Mainly, Dr. Salimul Haq spoke about the climate change, and also which has been supported by our Dr. Anurag as well. And Dr. Anamika Barua mainly highlighted the importance of water, transboundary waters. I will request you to, this is a question and answer session, although we ran out of time, but we have some time, we'll take some time. And then we go for a Q&A. If you have your question, please send your question to the chat box, and I will pick up a question from there. I have a small, I will start with a small question to Dr. Salimul Haq. He has mentioned the importance of the greenhouse effect and how is being global warming, everything, and the sea level rise, and then the melting of water, everything is the global warming effect. If I'm not wrong. So in fact, that is from the CO2, carbon dioxide emission. And from where we can, who is the largest carbon dioxide emitter at present is China is the largest carbon dioxide emitter. And in the last conference, China committed that they are going to reduce the carbon dioxide emission. But if you see the report, they have in fact increased, and to some extent it has been increased to double the use of coal by China. Dr. Salimul Haq will be a mute. He knows it better. Even the Pakistan, they have huge stories of coal, which the Western countries refuse to use because of the CO2 effect. But now China is going there to Pakistan to use those coal. So, and again, United States, they have given the ultimatum to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. So if the big countries, they are deviating, should I say, from their commitments or something, then what will happen to us? So it's poor country like Bangladesh. So if they are not committed, then definitely CO2 will increase, and then global warming will happen. There will be a climate migration. Then what should be our action? Thank you very much, Dr. Salimul Haq.
Thank you very much. Very big question, and I don't think we have enough time for me to go into a detailed answer. But before I do try and address it, let me thank Dr. Barua and Dr. Anurag for excellent contributions. I actually, I'm very glad I stayed away from the actual topics of ecology and water resources, since you have been able to cover those so well. And I went to the climate change side, which is more my strength. So I think between the three of us, we gave a good balanced and synergistic set of presentations. So thank you, both of you, very much. I really enjoyed your interventions. With respect to your question, I accept the fact that China and the United States are the two biggest powers in the world. They are not doing enough, granted, but there is something even bigger than their political leaders deciding not to do enough. And what is even bigger is science. The world is moving, and not only science, the global investment community is moving with their dollars, with their euros, with their pounds, and they are not investing in coal, I can tell you. What you are seeing with the promotion of coal is the last breath of some countries and companies that are dependent on coal, trying to sell their coal and their coal technology somewhere else. I don't know if you saw this, but one of the biggest companies in the world, General Electric, which was one of the biggest suppliers of coal technology, coal manufacturing, the electricity from coal, has stopped. They said there's no future in this. It's $1 billion portfolio for General Electric. And they have, as of yesterday, said, that's it, we are stopping this. There's no future in it. Investing in coal, anybody who does it is stupid. They're doing it for different reasons, not because it has a future. And so that is an even bigger moving force than a president or a prime minister deciding, I want to hang on to my coal industry. Same thing in India, same thing in Bangladesh, I think. You know, coal is dead. Anybody who wants to revive it is flogging a dead horse, all right? And they can only do it for a little bit of time, and then it'll be gone. And the reason why it will be gone is the inevitable enhancement of renewable energy. Both solar and wind do not cost us anything. We don't pay for the sun, we don't pay for the wind. All we pay for is the technology to convert sunlight and wind energy into useful electricity for us. And the cost of doing that, every day, it's coming down. There's an auction for energy provision taking place every day somewhere in the world. And the price that they were given yesterday, the price today is lower. The price tomorrow will be even lower. And within a matter of days, not even weeks and months and years, coal has gone, petroleum will be next, and natural gas will be next. The moment renewable energy is cheaper to deliver at scale, then why should anybody put money in those? Right now, they're not putting money in coal. Then they will stop putting money in petroleum, and then they'll stop putting money in natural gas. So anybody who thinks that investing in those fossil fuels is a good idea, maybe for a few years, it can, they can get some profits, but after that they won't. Renewable energy is moving very, very fast. So the final point is, what should Bangladesh do? We should go into renewables in a big, big scale, as much more than we can have been doing so far. And this should be the same for the entire region in the Bay of Bengal. I'll end with one example. Bangladesh has actually invested in solar home systems. We have more than 5 million households with solar home systems, which is supplying electricity, small electricity, household level electricity, but nevertheless, very important electricity to 20 million poor households who used to depend on kerosene lamps in the evenings. They don't anymore, they have light. And that improves the quality of their life enormously. And so, renewable energy has a huge potential that we should be investing in, and we should become a leader in my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salimul Haq. I have not got any written question, but however, if you click to the participants, so there is a provision that you can raise your hand. So if you raise your hand, then I will pick up from there. So meanwhile, I will request Ambassador Tariq Karim to ask your question or doubt. Ambassador Tariq Karim.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are loud and clear, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to take a couple of minutes to try and add something to what the Dr. Salimul Haq and the two panelists have already so eloquently and elaborately and painstakingly fleshed out for us. Many of us don't realize that or don't appreciate enough the fact that there is an intrinsic connection between global warming, climate change, and what is happening in the larger ecology. Global warming and climate change and the consequences feed directly into the ecology, which then impacts our social and economic dimensions of our lives. And it has also been pointed out earlier in the discussions that when we look at the blue economy or the Bay of Bengal particularly, we still think of in purely economic terms. But in doing so, most of us, because our discussions have not been holistic, in a sense, we are still thinking in silos. We tend to forget that in the Bay of Bengal, for example, there are two looming dangers. Dr. Anurag pointed to the effect that climate change is already having on freshwater flows. You know, fresh water is a depleting resource, but climate change and global warming, which is leading to the rise in the ocean levels already, it's a given. If global temperatures rise, water temperatures will rise, and heating has the capacity of expanding water, the volume of water. So what's happening is that the freshwater flows are being impacted in a double whammy situation. In Bangladesh already, we are facing creeping salinity inwards. Our coastal areas, the tube wells are now pumping out saline water. So we have to fall back more on fresh water coming from inland, and that needs to be affected. You mentioned about the 13.5% of the endangered population along the coastal belt. The original IPCC projection was that 20% of population could become internally displaced if we are not able to control the climate change and global warming. So these have ecological effects. Now, more seriously, and not much is known about it, many of us publicly not aware that there is a dead zone of 64,000 kilometers in the Bay of Bengal. And it is perilously closer to the shores of coastal areas of West Bengal, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, and further away from the southern coastal littoral states. Why is this happening? It's also related to another phenomenon. We have a plastic soup developing in the Bay of Bengal. Although much of the plastics escapes the Indian Ocean and goes out into the Atlantic, it somehow bypasses South Asia at the tip. But because of this confluence of climatic factors of wind currents and ocean vortices and currents, somehow the tendency, the Bay of Bengal acts like a funnel. The plastic is moving more into the Bay of Bengal, and the ocean, the dead zone is moving northwards, which means that whatever estimates we are making of available marine life that we can harvest is in grave peril. What will be there to harvest if it all dies because of lack of sufficient oxygen or over nitrogenation? So these, whatever literature I have found in the public domain says this is happening, we don't know why it's happening, more study needs to take place. And I think here, the Bay of Bengal countries who are, let us look at our own region, the global region, as Professor Salimul Haq pointed out, is a huge issue. Can we manage it locally in the Bay of Bengal? And I thank Professor Dr. Anurag for the suggestion that Bangladesh, being at this sort of center of the Bay of Bengal, can play a leading role. And I'm so glad that we had participants from West Bengal and from Assam, which are actually representing upper Riparian and closer to the Himalayas, how much they are also interested in what is happening in the lower riparians and in the Bay. So I end my intervention here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tariq Karim. This is, I consider, as a comment, a very valued comments on the issue. Dr. Anamika Barua, floor is yours.
Yeah, I have my question to actually Professor Huck. I'm not sure if he's there.
He should be here. Okay, please raise your question. We'll see. At least it will be recorded.
Yeah, okay. So my question is basically, a first point was a comment, and I think that the reason why coal is cheaper than the renewable energy is because we are not including the externalities into the price of coal. If we include the externalities into the price of coal, which is a negative externality, I think price of coal will be much higher than the price that one would pay for wind and solar. The question that I had for him was that, which is true that wind power and the solar power has to be the main source, including, I think, hydropower, eventually, if we want to give our, commitment to the Paris Agreement. But the concern that usually is raised in the developing countries is the employment issues as well. When you look at coal, there is a large section of people are employed into coal. But when you go to wind and solar and even hydro, the employment concerns are not really taken into account. And this is a kind of a criticism that we usually hear. So that is where I just wanted to have his input. How should we defend ourselves in this particular point? That, that this also has to be managed. And probably one way could be energy mix, that you start with not all of a sudden with one source of energy, but coal, and eventually you start reducing the percentage of coal. If he's there, I would like to hear from him. Otherwise, yeah, that was my question.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Anamika Barua. Dr. Salimul Haq, we can't see you. Are you there, or could be electricity or network problem? These are
Not here. I just called him and he's not picking up the phone, so I don't know.
So it's it could be electrical problem. So anyway, I can't see any more hands. Okay. So Ambassador Tariq Karim, please go ahead, sir.
I'll try to address part of Anamika's question. As Dr. Salimul Haq pointed out, the increasing trend is to move away from coal. And even recently, I saw a report that even LNG is now being dubbed as a villain because there are some studies show that LNG, the CO2 emissions are equally high, if not higher, in some cases. And yes, wind and solar are the options that we have to increasingly fall back on. But I would also take a cue from Anamika's suggestion of greater cooperation on the water basins. What we have also totally not addressed so far, and these are basically stemming from political problems in regional cooperation, is that we have stayed away from harnessing or harvesting the latent energy tapped in the waters. Some of it is being tapped, and Bhutan is, in fact, it has become not just a lower middle, it's become a higher upper middle income country through exporting its hydropower, and they have tapped only 10 or 15% of what the potentials are. Okay, Nepal has woken up to this reality. The Northeast has remained in the backwaters of this for too long. They have about 200,000 megawatts of, or up to, it will, I think, progressively be less because big dams are not popular in concept anymore, but you can have smaller cascading dams, or part of basin management will depend on that. How you train and control the flow of rivers and ensure that sufficient water is available. Because let us not forget that over 60%, up to 60, 65% of these waters just flow into the sea. We are not able to harness them. Can we do it in a manner that we store sufficient for our lean seasons everywhere. We also build up irrigation drainage channels, which will spread the devastation that is caused by floods. And, but that requires collaborative engagement by all the basin countries. So that's part of the answer. If Dr. Salimul Haq joins, maybe he can address the rest. Thank you.
Sir, I don't see him anyway, and also I don't see any more hands as well. Already we have crossed the time, or we were almost within the time. I will end the question and answer session here. And thanks. Just a brief summary from my side. I guess the speakers and the panelists have made it amply clear the importance of ecosystem and environment importance of the Bay of Bengal. So we have to make all kinds of endeavor to maintain the health of the Bay of Bengal, what is most important. I believe young participants today in the webinar, possibly there are some from IUB or from other side. My message is that the webinar will be successful only if we can raise the maritime awareness. We must grow maritime awareness amongst our young generations, educate them in the maritime sector so that these young generation are able to equip themselves to work in the maritime domain and reap the benefit of sea, which is our Bay of Bengal. And also I am confident that fourth day, today is the second day, the total fourth day, I hope as a DG BIMRAD, our webinar will be able to grow maritime awareness amongst general people, along with some recommendations, which we will, 3 institutions will pursue in our future course of action. I'm sure that our research findings will add value in taking decision at the government level in the maritime sector. It is indeed a matter of great privilege and honor for me to moderate the second session on ecology and environmental importance of the Bay of Bengal. I convey my thanks to all participants for cooperating with me in running the webinar. Thank you very much. And now just I will call upon Ambassador Tariq Karim to say express his closing remarks. Ambassador Tariq Karim.
Thank you, Chair. It's my pleasant duty actually to wind up by giving a vote of thanks to everyone. First and foremost, the Vice Chancellor for having graced the occasion and setting the keynote or the tone of this discussion. I wish to congratulate Admiral, our partner organization, BIMRAD's Director General, Commodore Qazi Imdadul Haq, for so efficiently and brilliantly, commendably moderating this session. Thank you, sir, for your participation, and also I thank your colleagues from the institution who have joined in. Shows that this is a serious collaboration and we take it seriously. I thank Dr. Salimul Haq for his brilliant, keynote address. It was packed with a lot of scientific data. He's explained to us, demystified to us much of the science that sort of overwhelms the ordinary public as to why we are witnessing these abnormal natural phenomena as we are. I think that is part of our endeavor will be also to try and bring it into public domain, that what is happening in global warming and climate change, every citizen has some contribution and role to play in order to try and meet the targets that have been set by the Conference of Parties. I thank my good friend, Professor Anamika Barua. She and I have participated in many of the dialogues of the Brahmaputra basin, including with China. And they have been very, very productive and positive dialogues. She mentioned about the lack of, initially the conversation would get bogged down on technicalities relating to data, but more and more people started realizing that there were more than data. As was pointed out, this data doesn't have to be physical. You have technology now. You can do a lot of data inference from satellite imaging. So, you know, we should not be hung up on this data. We need to go beyond and arrive basically at the formation of epistemic communities, as Dr. Anurag also pointed out. We need to form a partnership of these. We are thinking purely within national configurations. How do we make it a regional configuration? Ultimately, what we do regionally will feed into the overall global scenario. I thank Dr. Anurag for joining in and for his invaluable comments and for the suggestion. Particularly, our destinies are bound together. Upper riparians and lower riparians cannot think in silos anymore. What the lower riparian does affects the upper riparian as badly sometimes as what the upper riparian does affects the lower riparian. This is, you know, these are not stopped by boundaries. I thank all participants as listed. I particularly wish to thank, we have, I think, many participants from the IUB community, our students and faculty for joining in. I hope they will think seriously on these issues and contribute to the dialogue that takes place nationally, and I hope across the national borders. I thank all colleagues in the IUB who work together and help to make this webinar today technically successful and enabled us all to participate. I wish to also thank, last but not least, our media partners in helping to project a very important topic, which has not been much in public conversations and narratives, and demystifying aspects of it to make the public more proactive. After all, policymakers also take their cue largely from how the public perception and public discussions are going. And therefore, it has to be truly a bottom-up process. And there are 2 more webinars coming up in this series. We hope that will sort of give a well-rounded dialogue for us to be able to glean and pick out the still main points, which we will then share with everyone. The next one is on September 29, which will focus exclusively on the economic aspects of the Bay of Bengal, on the blue economy and related aspects. And then the final rounding up is on the 6th of October, which deals with the regional aspects of the Bay of Bengal, what the littoral countries and the landlocked countries how they are affected and what they can do to optimize the presence of the Bay of Bengal and the resources there, as well as to conserve the resources for sustainable use, not only for our generation, but for future generations. I thank you all. Moderator, you may wish to close the webinar.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Ambassador Tariq Karim. Thank you very much for your speech and closing remarks. With this, we come to the end of our today's webinar. And I will request today's chair, Professor Milan Pagod, to close the webinar. Thank you.
Well, actually, you're the chair. Go ahead and close it.
Sorry, yes, you. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Then we close the seminar today, and we'll see on 29th on economic importance of Bay of Bengal.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.